think that that restraint, if you like to call it that, was a result necessarily of civic consciousness or growing secularism or anything. It was suddenly that people realized that you're actually in a situation of a balance of violence, which has perhaps been also historically one of the ways in which peace was maintained between communities. Sad to say, but it may well have been that. But whatever the case may be, I do think it was really a watershed in that sense that it didn't lead to any kind of wild reprisals, it didn't lead to anything like that. And even though there was a lot of saber rattling, especially in the media, the Indian government's response was also, I think, quite exemplary. I mean, they recognized that Pakistan had a problem, that there was this problem, and that. So I think a lot of positive things did come out of it.
Okay, fine.
Thank you. I just wanted to take you up on your point about the fading of the nation state, because I think it can be perhaps dangerous to think in those ways. The nation state probably has faded for those of us who are in a position where we can enjoy the kind of lifestyle that you describe. But I feel far from it fading, it has become far more difficult for people who live in different circumstances to actually move at all. And this is something we found when in our research for this project, that people who moved in 47 and live literally just across the border from their families have never been able to go back, they never call, they maintain no contact. So I think one can over-exaggerate the sort of transnationalism of globalization and underestimate the extent to which, in fact, globalization and the nation state are making the kind of mobility you talk about so much more difficult.
I absolutely agree, Jaya. I don't... Look, when I was a kid, for us, the nation state was an expression of freedom. The idea is that the nation state is a sort of expression of a collective act of free will, Today, what the nation state is exactly what you say. It's in fact a large reservation. In as much as nation states exist, it's for containing populations and preventing movement. So that I would not, I would not dispute at all. But I do think that even under those conditions, if you look, say, whether it be in India or in Bangladesh or wherever, today, an ordinary person, even within a village, their conception, their relationships with the world outside are saturated with a sort of knowledge of each other in a way that wasn't the case, I think, 20 or 30 years ago. And in that sense, even though they may not be physically able to travel, they are, in some imaginative way, engaged in an act of travel, and that makes the physical impossibility of travel even worse. Because actually, I know, as many of us South Asians do, that when you meet actual South Asians who've traveled, who are outside, who are in some other place, they almost always say, what the hell did I give it all up for? Why did I come? More often than not, you hear that. But it's because of this, how shall I say, this imaginative idea that there's something better on the other side that creates this crisis.
Okay, we're up against it, so that's we're 5 minutes over. But I just want to say thank you very much to Amitav Ghosh, and thank you very much for turning up as well.
Very interesting question.
Good evening. My name's Claire Alexander, and I'm based in the Sociology Department here at the LSE. Firstly, I want to thank Amitav and Safras for such a fascinating discussion this evening. And I want to take just a few minutes before you all head off into the cold to introduce a new project related to the themes that we've discussed this evening. And this, which is the Bangla Stories website, an educational resource pack, which is aimed at school children in Britain at Key Stage 3, so aged between 11 to 14 years old. And the website is a collaboration between the LSE, Cambridge, and the Runnymede Trust, and it's been very generously sponsored by the LSE's HIFE for Knowledge Transfer Fund. The website's based on a 3-year Arts and Humanities Research Council funded project on the Bengal diaspora, which was co-directed by Joya Chatterjee, who sat at the front, and myself. And the project explores the history and experience of migration from and within Bengal in the period after partition, from the viewpoint of migrants themselves. It's estimated that around 20 million people have been displaced or migrated in this period. It's one of the largest migrations of the modern era. The vast majority of these, of course, remained in South Asia itself, with about 1% only migrating overseas to Britain and other parts of the world. Our project focused on Bengali Muslim migrants in South Asia and in the UK, and we were exploring where, why, and how people moved, and how they made new lives for themselves and their families in unfamiliar places. Our two researchers, Anu Jaleh, who unfortunately can't be here today, and Shahzad Feroz, who sat at the front, have been working in India, in Bangladesh, and Britain to collect the life histories of migrants, and they've collected over 150 interviews, along with photographs and family trees, which form the substance of this website. The stories that these migrants tell are extraordinarily rich and moving, and provide a powerful lens onto the sweep of history from below. And we're keen to give this wonderful stories as wide an audience as possible. We've been very lucky to draw on the expertise of the Runnymede Trust to do this. Runnymede has a long-standing educational expertise and a commitment to working with young people, and they've helped us translate our material into a more accessible and contemporary form. I actually think that all academic researchers should be made to communicate their research to 13-year-olds. It's a salutary experience, I can tell you. And I'm personally very grateful to Robert Berkeley and Bastiana Belfon, who've been helping us with this and have been incredibly patient with what's been a challenging exercise, particularly for someone who's basically technophobic, as I am. And we decided to open up the gateway to this fascinating and very complex history through the personal stories of 8 real-life migrants, some of them the 4 you can see here, one of them from each of the 8 sites that we worked in, and who have very different experiences of migration and settlement. And a couple of them I'm going to present here, and the illustrations are done by David Fathers, and I think are really stunning. So the first one is Muhammad Shamsul Haq, who serendipitously actually was a Lascar and now lives in Dinajpur on the northwestern Bangladesh border with India. This is him on the right. I think the guy on his left is one of his sons. He told Anu, who did this interview, that he believed he was 108 years old. He may have not been quite that old, but anyway. His family were originally from the Punjab, but Shamsul was born in Calcutta during the time of the Raj. His father worked for the British on the railways. But Shamsul told us that he used to dream of the sea and of travelling. He got work as an oilman on a British steamer called the Arenda and travelled to Colombo, to Africa, to Rangoon, to Singapore and Jeddah, as well as to London. In London, he told us he admired the beautiful houses, the wide roads and the big warehouses. His ship was sunk by the Japanese in World War II, and Shamsul was adrift for 8 days on the sea before being rescued. He returned to Calcutta and said he'd lost the desire to go to sea after that. So he opened a tea stall. But he moved to East Pakistan and then to Assam after partition. And then in the 60s, he was moved to Dinajpur as a refugee when the Indian army threw him out. And he still lives there in a refugee camp next to this temple. And he spends his time telling his great-grandchildren about his travels. He said that he'd lost contact with his extended family. And this is a quote: "We lost addresses and contact details 3 times. The first time in a fire in Calcutta, the second time in Noakhali in the floods, and the third time when we were chased away by the Indian army from Assam. They must be dead now, but I remember them fondly in my heart." The second story is from the UK fieldwork. Samuz Mir is now in his late 70s, and he came to Britain in 1964 from Sylhet, like most of the British Bengalis. Samuz came on a voucher visa. He arrived in Heathrow and travelled by taxi to Burnley, where he worked in the cotton mills for 25 years as a weaver and then as a sewing machinist. He arrived in January, and he told Shahzad that there were no street lights, and because of the winter nights, he, quote, thought there was no day here. We would only see the daylight for 3 or 4 hours, and then it was dark. He recalled that the local English people and the local police were very kind to the new arrivals. He shared a house with 10 other Bengali migrants, and they spent most of their money back to their families in Bangladesh. He brought his family to Britain in 1971 after the Liberation War. Samuz has 9 children. His oldest son owns a restaurant nearby. 3 of his daughters are teachers. 1 is a secretary and 1 is a social worker, though she used to be a police officer. His youngest 2 children are students. He said he was happy living in Burnley because he told us that unlike in nearby Oldham, in Burnley there are no racists. Burnley, of course, is currently one of the strongholds of the British National Party. And I mentioned that not to disagree with Shamaz's experience actually, but because these stories of Bengali migration are also the story of Britain. This is the story of the East